All right, settle down everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I'm here to talk about Family Guy, Season 24, Episode 12, which, let's be honest, sounds like a title that came out of a fever dream after a bad Taco Bell run. And speaking of fever dreams, let's talk about the guy who helmed this particular episode, Joe Danilo. Now, Joe's been around the block with Family Guy, churning out episodes that, bless his heart, usually fall into that fine, I guess, category. He's not exactly known for pushing boundaries or delivering gutbusters that redefine comedy. More like he's the guy who brings a perfectly adequate potato salad to the potluck. And this episode, it felt like another potato salad. Perfectly fine, but nothing you'd write home about. The show opened with that classic, almost aggressively cheerful theme song. The one that's supposed to remind you of simpler times, but mostly just makes me feel like I'm being lectured by a perky kindergarten teacher. You know, lucky there's a Family Guy. Yeah, lucky we have Peter Griffin to do whatever it is Peter Griffin does. And then we immediately crash land into Dr. Hartman's office, who's apparently so bored he's playing Rock Band. Seriously? A doctor with patients waiting, jamming out? And it's not even a cool band, it's just him singing about a mess. That's peak Family Guy, right? Setting up a mundane situation and then immediately making it weird. Then Peter walks in, apparently for a physical, and it's just a slow descent into medical awkwardness. Dr. Hartman, bless his heart, asks how many drinks Peter has a week, and Peter answers 450. It's that classic Peter logic where he thinks a lot means a number that breaks the universe. And then the pop culture quiz. Oh, the pop culture quiz. Peter's stumped by basically everything on the Spotify Top 10. He thinks Dua Lipa is Duolingo. Duolingo! I swear, sometimes I think Peter's brain is powered by a hamster on a wheel that's fallen off the wheel. The Gen Z judge who's sad about almonds? That's the show's attempt at being relevant, I guess, but it just feels forced. They're trying so hard to make a point about how out of touch people are, but it's Peter being out of touch. The whole bit about the colonoscopy with the plumber from Southie explaining it in terms of snaking a camera in your caboose is peak Family Guy gross-out humor. And the whole "it sounds gay but it ain't" thing? Yeah, that's a classic Quahawk sensibility.
They always have to throw in that slightly uncomfortable, often offensive tag. It's like a spice they can't resist adding, even if it ruins the dish. Meanwhile, Stewie and Brian are off to the animal shelter. This is where the episode starts to split, as they often do. Brian, naturally, sees himself as some kind of canine messiah, ready to inspire the shelter dogs with his story. And what a story it is! Apparently, he was picked up on the side of the road like a runaway hooker and did hand stuff for drugs. That's quite the resume. It's the show leaning hard into Brian's past as a washed-up, self-important failure. And then Brian's entire narrative about inspiring sad dogs gets derailed by his hatred of cats. The absolute meltdown he has when he encounters them is something else. He goes from wise philosopher dog to rabid, frothing monster in seconds. And the fact that he ends up killing a kitten? That's the big turning point for his storyline. It's the kind of dark turn that Family Guy sometimes goes for, and it usually lands with a thud because it feels so out of nowhere. Meanwhile, the guys are all gearing up for their colonoscopies, and they decide to do it together, in a cabin, for support. This is where the episode tries to be about friendship and facing fears, but it's filtered through the lens of pure, unadulterated grossness. Their prep cocktails are named things like Bum and Coke and Pina Colada. The sheer commitment to the bit is almost admirable. The ensuing bathroom chaos in the cabin is exactly what you'd expect from this show. A frantic scramble for the toilet, the inevitable farts, and the general indignity of it all. It's designed to be uncomfortable and funny, and for some people, it probably is. For me, it's just a lot. It's the show trying to get a laugh out of bodily functions, and honestly, they've done it 1,000 times before. The big reveal during Peter's colonoscopy is that he swallowed a vintage G.I. Joe, a $100,000 G.I. Joe. This is the episode's central gimmick, and it's pretty wild. How did it get there? Peter chalks it up to squishing things into Wonder Bread when he was a kid. It's the kind of nonsensical origin story that only Family Guy can pull off. And the immediate fallout, the guys realizing they're all going to be rich, the betrayal, the lawsuits, That's the real heart of this episode, if you can call it that. It's about greed and how quickly friendship goes out the window when money is involved. It's a classic Family Guy setup. A ridiculous premise leads to a chaotic, morally bankrupt outcome. And then Mayor West's cat goes missing, and it's revealed that Brian killed it. The whole G.I. Joe plotline suddenly gets a whole lot darker because now Brian's story involves accidental kitten murder. He's trying to escape, and Quagmire, in a rare moment of slightly less awful behavior, gives him a go bag, which is basically just a bunch of random junk. The irony of Brian lecturing about morality while simultaneously being a fugitive kitten killer is not lost on me. The final act sees the guys suing Peter for his share of the G.I. Joe money, and then Stewie, ever the legal genius, shows up with a plan involving anal salvage law. It's the kind of hyper-specific, absurd legal concept that they pull out of thin air to justify whatever ridiculous plot they've cooked up. It's the show's way of saying, we know this is insane, but here's a fake legal reason why it makes sense. This episode, like many Family Guy episodes, feels like a collection of loosely connected gags and plot threads that eventually, sort of, tie themselves together. It's got the gross-out humor, the pop culture references, or lack thereof, the character hijinks, and a dash of surprisingly dark humor. It's not the worst episode I've ever seen, but it's far from the best. It's just there. Another Tuesday night installment of Peter Griffin's misadventures, leaving you with a vague sense of mild amusement and a slight feeling of bewilderment. It's the definition of a show that's been on too long. It knows the formula, it executes the formula, and you know exactly what you're going to get. And sometimes that's just fine. You know, if you're enjoying this deep dive into Peter's insides, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It's like a G.I. Joe for your YouTube feed. It makes things way more fun and gets you ready for action. This episode really felt like it was trying to poke fun at the idea of old-fashioned values, using the colonoscopy as this metaphor for confronting uncomfortable truths and facing your inner demons, or in Peter's case, your buried childhood toys. On the surface, you have this whole storyline about Peter and his friends being terrified of their upcoming colonoscopies. They're all worried about what they might find, both literally inside them and metaphorically in their lives. The idea of going to a cabin together to prep is a classic sitcom trope, but Family Guy takes it and runs it through the gutter, as expected.
It's not about genuine emotional support. It's about shared embarrassment and the potential for extreme physical discomfort. The humor comes from the absurdity of men in their 40s and 50s having to hold hands while they purge their insides. It's the contrast between the supposed maturity of the characters and their childlike approach to a basic medical procedure. They make it into this whole event, complete with custom prep cocktails and a diarrhea playlist. It's their way of coping by making a spectacle out of something universally unpleasant. And through all this, the episode is really saying something about how we, as people, deal with fear and the unknown. We either run from it, make a joke of it, or try to confront it together, usually in the most awkward way possible. For Peter, the fear of the colonoscopy is amplified by the discovery of the G.I. Joe. This isn't just a random piece of plastic. It's a symbol of his buried past, a literal manifestation of something he swallowed and forgotten. The fact that it's a valuable toy only adds another layer of absurdity to the situation. It's the universe, in its infinite wisdom, throwing a financial lifeline to Peter Griffin, but only after forcing him to confront his internal plumbing. And it raises the question, what are we all carrying around inside us, literally and figuratively, that could be worth something? What forgotten parts of our past are still inside us, waiting to be discovered? The episode then pivots to Brian's storyline at the animal shelter, which feels like a separate episode entirely, but it does touch on similar themes of responsibility and consequences. Brian, the supposed intellectual of the group, lectures the dogs about hope and inspiration, only to then go on a violent rampage and kill a kitten. It's the ultimate hypocrisy. His noble pronouncements are completely undercut by his actions. It highlights the disconnect between who we think we are and who we actually are when put under pressure. His attempt to inspire the dogs by sharing his own pathetic life story, being picked up like a hooker, doing hand stuff for drugs, is so bleak it's almost funny. But then the kitten murder happens and the humor just evaporates. It's a moment that's designed to shock, and it does, but it also leaves a bad taste in your mouth because it feels gratuitous. It's a dark turn that's not really earned,
and it makes Brian's subsequent guilt and fear of reprisal feel a bit hollow, especially when he's demanding exorbitant prices for his silence.
The contrast between Brian's self-importance and his actual actions is a running theme with him, but this episode takes it to a new low. The G.I. Joe plotline also serves as a commentary on the nature of friendship and loyalty, especially when money is involved. Peter's friends immediately turn on him when they realize how much the G.I. Joe is worth. They go from being buddies sharing a gross medical experience to scheming opportunists. Quagmire and Cleveland in particular are just waiting to cash in. Their arguments about who deserves the money, Peter's claim that he carried him for decades, and their threat to sue him, it's all very petty and predictable. It's the show saying that in the end, human relationships are often transactional, and greed can override genuine connection. And the introduction of Stewie as the legal mastermind, studying anal salvage law, is a classic Stewie move. He always finds a way to be smarter and more calculating than everyone else, even when the law he's studying is completely made up. It's his way of controlling the situation and ensuring that Peter doesn't get away with anything, while also potentially profiting from it himself. The episode tries to wrap up with this idea of consequences, both for Brian's actions and for Peter's hoarding of the G.I. Joe, but it feels a bit rushed. The legal battle is set up, Brian is on the run, and we're left with the typical Family Guy sense of unresolved chaos. The writing quality, in my opinion, was typical Family Guy. A few genuinely funny moments, some predictable jokes, and a plot that often felt like it was being made up on the fly. The humor was hit or miss, with the gross-out stuff landing more consistently than the character-driven jokes. The pacing felt a little off in places, particularly when jumping between Brian's storyline and the colonoscopy plot. It's an episode that feels more like a series of sketches than a cohesive narrative. Visually, it was standard Family Guy animation. Nothing particularly stood out, which is fine for this show, but it didn't elevate the material either. The direction was functional, serving the jokes and the plot, but without any real flair. Overall, my personal verdict on this episode is that it's a solid meh. It's not offensively bad, but it's certainly not a highlight of the season. It's an episode that exists, and that's about all I can say for it. It's a prime example of a show that's coasting on its legacy, delivering exactly what fans expect, but not necessarily offering anything new or exciting. It's for the die-hard fans who will watch anything, and for them it's probably perfectly fine. If I had to pick one thing that would have pushed the score higher, it would have been a more satisfying resolution to Brian's kitten-killing escapade, or a less nonsensical way for the G.I. Joe to end up in Peter's colon. It's episodes like this that make you appreciate the truly brilliant ones, and also realize how many mediocre ones there are. Okay, let's dive into the moments that made this episode, well, exist. First up, the absolute classic opening where Dr. Hartman is absolutely not playing Rock Band. You hear the music, you hear him singing that awful song, and then the objects clatter. It's the perfect setup for the absurdity that's about to unfold. This isn't just a doctor's office, it's a chaotic free-for-all. The joke is that doctors are supposed to be these stoic, professional figures, but Hartman is just a slob who can't even keep his office quiet. It's funny because it's so relatable. We've all encountered people who are terrible at their jobs, but do them anyway. This moment sets the tone for Peter's entire visit. It's going to be unprofessional, slightly gross, and ultimately unproductive. What it's really saying is that even in the most serious settings, there's room for utter incompetence and silliness. I would have loved to see Hartman actually playing Rock Band, not just singing along vaguely. Like, have him in full drumming pose, sweat dripping, just completely lost in the game while a patient is literally bleeding out in the next room. That would have been peak Family Guy. My personal reaction? It's a solid chuckle. It's not groundbreaking, but it's a good, quick gag to get things rolling. Next, let's talk about Peter's pop culture knowledge, or rather, his complete lack thereof. He thinks Dua Lipa is Duolingo. Duolingo. This is where the writers are playing on the Peter is a dumb idiot trope, but they take it to an extreme. He's not just unfamiliar with a song, he's confusing a major pop star with a language-learning app. It's a ridiculous leap, and that's what makes it funny. It's the sheer audacity of the misunderstanding. What it says about Peter is that he's completely checked out from the modern world. He's living in his own little bubble, and anything that doesn't involve beer or TV is just background noise. It's a critique, in a way, of people who refuse to engage with anything outside their comfort zone.
I would have made the connection even more absurd. Maybe he thinks Dua Lipa is a brand of toaster oven or a type of exotic bird, something completely unrelated to music or apps. That would have elevated to stupidity even further. This moment, for me, is just a perfect encapsulation of why Peter is Peter. He's not malicious, he's just profoundly ignorant. Then we have the plumber from Southie explaining the colonoscopy. This whole bit is designed to be graphic and funny through sheer shock value. The description of snake in this frickin' camera in your caboose and the insistence that it ain't gay, it's a real medical procedure, is classic Family Guy trying to push buttons. They're taking something intimate and medical and making it overtly crude. The humor comes from the discomfort, the vulgarity, and the very specific, slightly offensive accent and dialect they've given the plumber. It's also funny because it shows how easily people can be scared off by something they don't understand, and how quickly they can resort to crude language to dismiss it. What it's really saying is that fear often stems from ignorance, and we try to make ourselves feel better by belittling the thing we're afraid of. I would have had the plumber also mention something completely irrelevant, like complaining about the price of gas or the local sports team's performance, in between describing the camera insertion. That would have added another layer of authentic, albeit bizarre, detail. This moment is memorable because it's so in your face, but it's the kind of humor that can alienate some viewers. Now for Brian's big, inspiring moment at the animal shelter. He's standing there looking all serious, ready to impart wisdom. But then he immediately asks, "How many of you were returned by Lena Dunham or Ellen DeGeneres?" It's this sharp, cynical jab at celebrity involvement with animal shelters and the often performative nature of it. It's funny because it's unexpected and specific. Brian, who fancies himself enlightened, starts by calling out celebrities. It's a meta joke about the show itself and the kind of people who might be watching. What it reveals about Brian is that even in his attempts at profoundness, he can't help but be a bit of a smug critic. He's trying to connect with these dogs, but he's doing it through cynicism. I would have made the celebrity names even more niche or unexpected. Maybe like, "Who here was abandoned by Gary Busey after he mistook you for a squirrel?" or something equally random. This moment is a good example of Family Guy's ability to deliver a quick, sharp social commentary.
And then the cat incident. Brian goes from inspiring lecturer to a savage beast in about 10 seconds. The moment he sees the cats, his whole demeanor changes. He starts hissing, barking, and then he's mauling a kitten. It's this sudden, extreme shift in character that's meant to be shocking. The visual of Brian, this sophisticated dog, just losing it completely is darkly comedic. It's the moment where his carefully constructed persona completely shatters. What it's really about is the primal nature that can lie beneath even the most intellectual exterior. Brian's supposed to be above all that, but his deep-seated issues, in this case a bizarre, irrational hatred of cats, make him snap. I would have drawn out the transition a bit more. Maybe he starts with just growling and sneering, and then the other dogs are trying to calm him down, but he just snaps and goes for it. The suddenness is effective, but a little build-up might have made the fall even harder. This is the most jarring moment of the episode for me. It's genuinely disturbing, and the attempt to then pivot back to humor afterwards feels off. Moving on to the colonoscopy prep cabin. The guys are all there, ready to embrace the misery. Peter gets bum and coke, Quagmire gets pina colada, and Cleveland gets gin and deuce. The names themselves are a joke, leaning into the alliteration and the absurdity of it all. The humor here is in the shared experience of humiliation. They're all men who probably wouldn't admit to being scared of a medical procedure, but they're doing it together, drinking these questionable concoctions. It's the camaraderie of shared discomfort. What this moment highlights is the male tendency to bond over shared experiences, even unpleasant ones, and to turn potential embarrassment into a shared ordeal. It's a way of deflecting from the actual fear by focusing on the silliness of the situation. I would have added more visual gags with the drinks themselves. Maybe the bum and coke actually has a little rubber ducky floating in it, or the pina colada comes in a hollowed-out pineapple. That would have added to the visual comedy. This scene is typical Family Guy, taking a mundane, uncomfortable situation and making it exponentially more absurd and gross. The discovery of the G.I. Joe inside Peter's colon. This is the big payoff for the medical plotline.
The ethereal music playing as the doctor holds up this childhood toy is a classic Family Guy move, juxtaposing something serious and medical with something utterly ridiculous.
The joke is the sheer unexpectedness of it. Who finds a valuable toy inside their intestines? Peter, apparently. It's the absurd discovery that fuels the rest of the episode. What it symbolizes is Peter's inability to let go of his past, or perhaps his body's literal inability to let go of things he shoved inside himself. It's a physical manifestation of his inner child, or just a terrible childhood decision. I would have had the doctor's reaction be even more understated. Like, he just calmly pulls it out, examines it, and says, "Huh, that's unusual," without any fanfare. The contrast between the preciousness of the toy and the sterile medical environment would have been funnier. This moment is pure gold. It's the kind of bizarre premise that makes you say, only Family Guy. Then comes the fight over the G.I. Joe money. Peter refuses to share the $100,000, claiming he was the one who spent decades carrying him to term. This is where the friendship crumbles. The instant they realize there's money involved, all the camaraderie from the cabin goes out the window. It's a cynical commentary on how quickly relationships can turn sour when wealth is at stake. The arguments are petty, devolving into accusations and threats. Quagmire and Cleveland are just waiting for their cut, and Peter, predictably, turns into a selfish jerk. What this scene is saying is that human nature, especially when it comes to money, is pretty grubby. It's a reminder that these characters are not necessarily good people, and their friendships are fragile. I would have made the arguments even more specific and ridiculous, like Quagmire arguing that because he helped Peter swallow the G.I. Joe, he deserves a finder's fee, or Cleveland arguing that his ancestors were the original carriers of G.I. Joes. That would have elevated the absurdity. This is the core conflict of the episode, and it's satisfying in its own darkly comedic way. The revelation that Brian killed Mayor West's cat. This is the dark twist that complicates everything. Brian's flight from justice becomes the primary concern, and the G.I. Joe subplot takes a back seat. The juxtaposition of Brian's moralizing earlier with his actual act of violence is stark. He's not just a failure, he's a killer. This raises the stakes considerably. It's the show throwing a wrench into the works, making Brian's situation far more serious than just a failed artistic endeavor. What this moment really does is show that Brian's self-importance is not just annoying, it's dangerous. He can snap and cause real harm, then try to escape the consequences. It's a reminder of his darker, more impulsive side. I would have had Brian try to justify the kitten killing in some insane philosophical way, even as he's panicking, like it was a cosmic necessity, a cleansing fire. That would have made him even more detestable, which in turn would make the humor darker. This moment is the emotional low point, and it's a testament to the show's willingness to go to dark places, even if it doesn't always stick the landing. Finally, Stewie's sudden expertise in anal salvage law. This is the ultimate deus ex machina, the kind of outlandish solution only Stewie can provide. He's gone from building time machines to mastering obscure legal fields overnight. It's the show's way of saying, we need a legal loophole to get out of this mess, and Stewie's our guy. The humor comes from the sheer ridiculousness of the situation and Stewie's unflappable confidence. It's a classic Stewie plot device. He's always the brains behind the operation, even when the operation involves lawsuits over swallowed toys. What this implies is that Stewie is constantly evolving, constantly acquiring new, bizarre skills. He's the ultimate overachiever, even in the most inappropriate of fields. It's also a way for the writers to set up a future plot, or to simply wrap up the current one in a way that feels slightly more intelligent than just having everyone scream at each other. I would have had Stewie explain anal salvage law in incredibly complicated academic terms, complete with footnotes and citations, just to highlight how absurd it is. This moment, for me, is the perfect blend of Family Guy's intelligence and its silliness. When it comes to the main characters, Peter Griffin in this episode is, shocker, mostly an idiot. But he's a kind of relatable idiot, at least in his initial fear of the colonoscopy. His reaction to the G.I. Joe discovery is pure Peter, immediate greed and zero regard for his friends. He's not just selfish, he's comically, outrageously selfish. His claim that he carried the G.I. Joe to term is peak Peter delusion.
He doesn't grow or change, he just goes from being scared to being greedy. His best moment is arguably the initial discovery, the sheer disbelief that this childhood relic is worth a fortune. His worst is his outright refusal to share, which is predictable but still frustrating. This episode doesn't necessarily change how I see Peter. It just reinforces his established character flaws in a new, bizarre scenario.
Brian Griffin goes from self-righteous guru to fugitive killer. His initial speech to the dogs is pretentious, and then his violent outburst and subsequent panic are the defining parts of his arc here. He's used well in the sense that his actions have serious consequences, but the shift from smug intellectual to kitten-murdering fugitive is jarring. His best moment is probably his initial cynicism about celebrity involvement, which felt sharp. His worst, obviously, is the kitten death. This episode definitely makes Brian look worse. His smugness is now tinged with actual danger and guilt, which, for once, feels somewhat earned, even if the execution is a bit heavy-handed. Glenn Quagmire is mostly there for the gross-out humor and the friendship drama. His reaction to Peter's G.I. Joe is pure greed, which is on brand for him. He's not given a lot to do beyond that and the colonoscopy prep scene. His best moment is probably his eagerness to sue Peter, which is classic Quagmire. His worst is just his general lack of development in this episode. He's the same old Quagmire. He's used fine as a supporting character who adds to the chaos, but he doesn't really offer anything new. Cleveland Brown is also mostly a supporting player, reacting to Peter's antics and participating in the group's shared misery. He's the most grounded of the guys, but that doesn't mean he's not susceptible to greed. His agreement to sue Peter is par for the course. His best moment is probably just his general calm demeanor during the colonoscopy prep, which is a funny contrast to the others' panic. His worst moment is simply that he's not given much of a storyline. He's there to fill space and add to the group dynamic. He's used adequately, but he's not exactly the driving force of this episode. Stewie Griffin, as usual, is the mastermind. His sudden expertise in anal salvage law is hilarious and perfectly in character. He's the one who can always find a loophole or a convoluted solution. His best moment is his confidence in his newfound legal knowledge. His worst moment is that he's barely in the episode until the very end, which is a shame because he's usually the most interesting character. He's used well as the ultimate problem solver, but his limited screen time is a drawback. This episode reinforces that Stewie is the smartest guy in the room, even when the room is filled with idiots. Mayor West provides the catalyst for Brian's downfall with his missing cat, Mauer West. His TikTok press conference is a funny, modern touch, showing how even local politicians are adapting to new platforms. His reaction to the loss of his cat is of course over the top. His best moment is the TikTok conference, which is a great visual gag. His worst moment is simply that his character is only there to serve Brian's plot. He's used effectively to raise the stakes for Brian's character. Now for the hidden gems and Easter eggs that you might have missed. First, that opening song itself. It's a classic Family Guy trope to have them sing that saccharine theme song and then immediately undercut it with something grim or absurd. The juxtaposition is always part of the joke, reminding you that this isn't your typical feel-good cartoon. It's a subtle nod to the show's anti-establishment, cynical core. Second, the mention of Duolingo by Peter. It's a quick pop culture gag, but it also speaks to how out of touch Peter is. He's so far removed from current trends that he's mistaking a language app for a pop star. It's a specific, modern reference that many might miss if they're not actively paying attention to the dialogue. Third, the plumber's accent and slang. The plumber from Southie isn't just a character. He's a walking stereotype of a certain kind of Bostonian. The writers are leaning into that caricature for comedic effect, and if you don't catch the nuances of that accent, you might just think it's a generic gruff voice. It adds a layer of specific humor that's lost on a broader audience. Fourth, Brian's backstory details. When he talks about being picked up on the side of the road like a runaway hooker and doing hand stuff for drugs, these are incredibly specific, dark details that hint at a much more troubled past for Brian than we usually see. They're thrown in quickly, almost as throwaway lines, but they add depth, albeit disturbing depth, to his character. You have to be listening carefully to catch these little nuggets. Fifth, the away brand luggage. Quagmire's pride in his luggage is a minor detail, but it's a specific brand name that many might not recognize. It's a nod to consumerism and superficial status symbols, something the show often mocks. It's a small detail, but it adds to the character of Quagmire, who values such things. Let's talk about what they could have done differently. For starters, the G.I. Joe ending. Instead of the friends immediately suing Peter, what if they tried to help him sell it, creating a bizarre, dysfunctional business venture?
Imagine Peter, Quagmire, and Cleveland trying to appraise and auction off vintage toys, all while still dealing with their post-colonoscopy issues. It could have been a goldmine for further absurd situations. Or, on Brian's side, instead of him just killing the kitten and panicking, what if he tried to cover it up in a truly elaborate and competent way? Like he tries to disguise the kitten as a dog, or he buries it in the shelter's catnip garden, leading to a bizarre chain reaction of feline chaos. That feels more in line with Brian's often misguided attempts at problem solving. Another idea, what if the G.I. Joe itself was sentient or had some kind of magical property? Imagine Peter having conversations with it, or the toy actively trying to escape his colon. That would have taken the absurdity to a whole new level and given Peter a more active role beyond just being a carrier. All right, verdict time. I'm giving this episode a solid 6.8 out of 10. It's not a disaster, but it's not a triumph either. It earns points for the sheer audacity of the G.I. Joe premise and Stewie's sudden legal prowess. The initial setup with Dr. Hartman was also a good laugh. However, it loses points for the underdeveloped Brian storyline and the predictable greed subplot among the friends. The humor, while occasionally sharp, often felt like it was running on fumes, relying heavily on gross-out gags and Peter's established idiocy. This episode is for the die-hard Family Guy fans, who will watch anything and enjoy the familiar beats. It's for viewers who appreciate the show's willingness to be crude and cynical, and who don't mind a plot that feels a little stitched together. For those looking for a fresh take or a truly memorable comedic experience, this might fall a bit short. One thing that would have pushed the score higher? A more creative resolution to Brian's crisis, or a less instantaneous descent into pure greed from Peter's friends. It felt like they hit the plot points they needed to hit, but without much imagination. And that brings us back to our friend Joe Daniello, the director who, much like this episode, delivered something perfectly adequate. He's not reinventing the wheel, but he's certainly keeping the engine running. It's episodes like this that serve as a reminder that even a show as long-running as Family Guy can still have its moments, even if those moments are buried under layers of questionable medical procedures and questionable life choices. It's the comfort food of animated sitcoms. You know what you're getting, and sometimes that's just enough.